In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed.
Hi, I'm Ben, and that was World War II hero and President Dwight Eisenhower you just heard from. He was dedicated to fighting for liberty worldwide, defeating fascism, so there are few voices more important than his when it comes to recognizing military objectives. You'll see that despite 60 years passing, his speech has never been more relevant. Eisenhower concluded that speech by remarking only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of our defense with our peaceful methods and goals. Unfortunately, we don't have that alert citizenry that Eisenhower speaks of, so we must do better. So what is the military-industrial complex? In essence, it's the informal dynamic shown here, in which military and defense contractors contribute to the campaigns of candidates for Congress. Elected officials then return the favor through allocating disproportionately high budgets for the Defense Department, which is then able to use this for expenditures, including government contracts for those defense companies, which turn high profits due to the lucrative contracts. They then continue to contribute to politicians, continuing the cycle. For fiscal year 2020, the United States spends $935 billion on its military, with a Pentagon budget, or the Department of Defense, of around $720 billion. Discretionary spending is not set by law, as is, say, Social Security, but rather spending is determined by annual appropriations bills, meaning that politicians have more manipulative control. The military takes up a whopping 57% of discretionary spending, as shown by that chart. This 2020 amount was a 5% increase from 2019, and this is all while proposing massive cuts to agencies that actually meet human needs, like the Department of Education, Housing, Urban Development, Transportation, and Labor, which were each cut anywhere from 10 to 22%. As shown by the graph, this level of spending is more than the next 10 countries combined. As the world's foremost geopolitical power, the US would have the highest amount, but this extreme contrast is noteworthy and can be attributed to the military-industrial complex's influence over Washington, D.C. We've been at war for nearly 2 decades, with the war on terror costing over $6 trillion, with expenditures continuing to rise. George W. Bush sent us into war in Afghanistan in 2001 to enact revenge on al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden for 9/11. Bin Laden has been dead for nearly a decade, and al-Qaeda is severely weakened in Afghanistan, yet we remain there. Bush also sent us into war in Iraq to overthrow Saddam Hussein. Hussein was knocked out of power and regime change enacted over 17 years ago, yet we are still there. Obama ran in 2008 on ending these wars, as did Trump in 2016, yet neither administration delivered on their promises. To the contrary, Obama actually increased the drone war, with 10 times more drone strikes than Bush. Beyond the astronomical financial costs of these wars, the human costs cannot be understated. Tragic deaths and seemingly inconceivable losses are a given. There's one man, a free thinker, who ultimately put service above self and enlisted post 9/11 to fight. One day, his platoon was split up after his Humvee broke down. They were ambushed, and in the confusion, soldiers from their own separated unit fired upon his group, bullets striking him in the head, killing him instantly. Adding insult to injury, our own government spent years attempting to cover up the incident of friendly fire. After 3 years, the truth finally emerged. That's the story of Arizona Cardinals star Pat Tillman. Even then, given his fame, his own country treated him like some PR headache, not the true hero he is, and numerous groups have since politicized his story against his family's wishes. Not every man in uniform had the platform and media attention of Tillman, but every death was a tragic loss. There have been almost 15,000 U.S. deaths in the War on Terror, and up to 801,000 on all sides. For those who make it home, the VA found that 15.7% of Operation Iraqi Freedom or Operation Enduring Freedom deployed veterans screened positive for PTSD. According to a 2016 report, an average of 20 veterans commit suicide every day. We fund trillions of dollars for these wars, but can't even afford to provide adequate healthcare and services for our veterans when they return home. Why on earth could that be? Perhaps it's because spending on VA healthcare doesn't turn a profit for political donors, but spending on war, that does. Let's also discuss the external costs of U.S. foreign policy decisions. Violations of international law are regular. Up to 335,000 civilians have been killed in the War on Terror, including an insane 207,000 Iraqis. The war in Iraq was illegal under international law stated at the time by UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. UN Security Council approval was never granted for the invasion, even though Colin Powell was sent to the UN to lie, holding up vials of uranium saying, "We don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud." It was pure fear-mongering without any evidence, as UN weapons inspectors never found the supposed weapons of mass destruction that was the initial premise for overthrowing Saddam. Additionally, throughout the War on Terror, torture was a favorite tactic of the W. Bush administration, as shown in this image, in violation of the Geneva Convention. Many of those 335,000 civilian deaths came in the form of drone strikes. In Afghanistan, a Doctors Without Borders hospital was bombed, killing 42 civilians. Meanwhile, American troops are told to stay quiet about child sexual assault committed by Afghan warlords that we are allied with. Another instance of awful, unethical decision-making was the military intervention and bombing of Libya. It created a power vacuum, leading to open slave markets in the streets that still exist today. Our Middle Eastern endeavors are meant to be focused on the protection of human rights, yet we ally closely and provide arms to Saudi Arabia, a brutal, authoritarian, theocratic regime that sets records for beheadings of citizens. It's also currently committing horrors in Yemen. I could go on with examples for days, but my point is, when the US acts as the world's police, look deeper. Do not just assume it's for some greater good. Consider geopolitical motives as well as the profit machine that's the military-industrial complex, which now that we've covered the fiscal cost, the human cost, and the questionable moral realities of war, let's discuss. Overall, there is a desire for geopolitical dominance and natural resources fueling these decisions, and as explained, war is extremely profitable for a select group, who then are able to continue to contribute some of those profits back to the policymakers. In 2018, aerospace and defense industry operating profits set an all-time record at $81 billion. In July, a 10% Pentagon budget cut was proposed to be reallocated to pandemic relief funds. Democrats who voted against it received 3.4 times more money from the defense industry than those who voted in favor. The US's extremely loose campaign finance laws allow for this. I also mentioned natural resources. Iraq and Syria have large amounts of oil, while Afghanistan has $3 trillion of mineral wealth. However, don't take my word for it, take the president's.
We've secured the oil, and therefore a small number of U.S. troops will remain in the area where they have the oil.
Not only does the military-industrial complex contribute monetarily, they get involved directly. Bush's VP, Dick Cheney, was CEO of oil driller Halliburton immediately before taking office and then became a top cheerleader of the Iraq War. Important cabinet members are regularly from the military-industrial complex. The defense secretary, Mark Esper, recently fired by Trump, was a Raytheon weapons lobbyist before. His replacement, a former defense contractor executive. So much for Drain the Swamp. President-elect Biden's choices don't sound much different. Secretary of State choice Tony Blinken just left a private equity fund that invests in defense contractors. He favors increasing weapons support to Saudi Arabia, as well as a coup in Venezuela. Surprise, another oil-rich nation. He also was a strong proponent of that Libya invasion. As was Biden's OMB appointment, Neera Tanden, who advocated forcing Libya to pay us for bombing them and taking their oil, as shown by the leaked email. The lack of ideological diversity reminds me of the quote from the great George Carlin. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. Congress failed to pass that 10% Pentagon budget reallocation, and the Senate approved a bloated $740 billion budget, 86 votes to 14. During the pandemic, 27 million Americans lost their health insurance, and thousands more have been evicted, and tens of millions more are at risk, with debts piling up and eviction protections expiring, as shown on the map. Millions more are food insecure, and while a budget adjustment could help, a bipartisan supermajority denied it. A stimulus bill has failed to pass for months. We got a $1,200 check, while most of our allies had stronger safety nets through either recurring UBI or payroll nationalization. And pre-COVID comparisons aren't too great either. Some 60,000 die each year from a lack of healthcare access, and over 40 million live in poverty. Those allies who had stronger pandemic stimulus programs, they also have universal healthcare and other strong programs. They get better bang for their buck on tax dollars due to many reasons, but it centers around stronger campaign finance laws, leading to wealthy lobbying groups like the military-industrial complex lacking the same influence, ultimately leading to a national budget that favors ordinary people more. An immediate withdrawal from all wars is necessary to achieve world peace through diplomacy. With groups like Al-Qaeda less influential than they once were, we can safely withdraw from the Middle East, while monitoring the situation through peaceful means. With all those countries on the map backing NATO, any attack on the US would be backed swiftly by these allies, many of which are other top military spenders. This alone is a major deterrent to aggression. A nation could be wiped out if they chose to pick a fight with these powers. Additionally, the diplomatic authority of the UN is another avenue that has reduced the need for excessive military force. Tensions are currently escalating with Iran, but just a few years ago the Obama administration established the nuclear deal, which both sides were abiding to perfectly until Trump threw it out. This shows how we can make peace with our enemies. Additionally, Obama decreased tensions with Cuba, showing how lower tensions can be achieved through methods just like these. Additionally, the U.S. could close some of its 800 military bases across the world to cut some costs. This shift towards non-intervention and diplomacy will allow for large budget reallocations. A cut of at least 25% would be practical and free up $200 billion for investment in education, healthcare, and other social services. The budget increases during Trump's presidency alone could cover free public college. Although healthcare is expensive, a Medicaid expansion would save lives, and we have failed to care for our veterans. Numerous other populist economic policies could offer both relief during this pandemic and a boost to the middle class to work to grow it back to its post-World War II size. At the end of the day, to achieve this goal of a budget that puts the average American first and strengthens the middle and working classes, we need honest ideological debate, not the current debate, which is corrupted by the influence of big money in politics, with politicians doing the bidding of special interests. To conclude, it's time to call out the cozy relationship between the defense industry and Washington politics. The American people must realize this dynamic of moral shortcomings and wasteful spending. Presently, there's no accountability in Washington, so it's up to us, its citizens, to achieve a more peaceful and prosperous nation in the world. At the end of the day, there's nothing more American than using our freedom of speech to demand better.